So, picture this. It's March 20, 2025.
Okay.
And there's this internet user. She goes by the handle, the Ghost of the Dead Girl, just, tumbling down one of those late-night digital rabbit
Oh,
holes.
look, all been there, just endlessly clicking links at 2 in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But right there, just nestled in the completely forgotten corners of the web, she stumbles onto, well, a ghost.
A literal ghost.
No, not a literal ghost, but an absolute holy grail of television history. She found this lost, completely unaired 16-minute hand-drawn pilot from 1998.
1998. Are you talking about the...
Yeah, the original $50,000 pitch pilot for Family Guy.
Oh, wow. That is... I mean, that's insane.
Right, and the craziest part of this whole discovery is that it wasn't locked away in some, I don't know, secure corporate vault at Fox.
Guarded by lasers and lawyers.
Exactly. No non-disclosure agreements, nothing. It was just sitting there, completely unnoticed on the personal portfolio website of one of the original animators, Robert Pulse.
You're kidding. On a public portfolio site.
Yes. It had been uploaded like 2.5 years prior, and the entire internet had just collectively scrolled right past it.
That is just, I mean, it's the ultimate piece of internet archaeology.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Glad to be here. Because when you think about the sheer cultural footprint of the show we are discussing today, the idea that its literal genesis point was just gathering digital dust on an obscure portfolio site is mind-boggling.
Which is exactly why we're pulling you, the listener, into this mission today. Because we are tracking the unprecedented life cycle of a genuine cultural juggernaut.
A juggernaut that really changed everything.
Yeah. We're going to explore how a college student's thesis project evolved into this beloved, boundary-pushing masterpiece, a show that actually conquered cancellation.
Which never happens.
Never. Only to slowly and honestly pretty painfully devolve into what a vast number of fans and critics now consider to be, well, the most hated show on television.
It is a remarkable and frankly somewhat tragic trajectory when you look at the whole timeline.
Definitely. And to piece this all together, we've got a massive stack of source materials in front of us.
Lots to get through today.
Yeah, we're looking at encyclopedic histories of that original 1998 pilot. We've got extensive video essays breaking down the show's shifting animation style.
And the decay of its core characters, which is a huge part of this.
Right. And we're even examining some really candid reflections from the creator himself, Seth MacFarlane, regarding the show's seemingly endless run.
Which is fascinating considering his current relationship with the show.
Oh, we are definitely getting into that later, but let's start right at the beginning. Because the origin story of Family Guy is filled with these amazing, almost accidental details that ended up defining the show's entire DNA.
The happy accidents.
Exactly. Like, take the voice acting. Seth MacFarlane famously voices 4 of the main characters, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire.
Yeah. And a lot of people just assume that was this massive ego play. Like, he wanted to be the main star of his own show.
Which, I mean, is a fair assumption in Hollywood.
Sure. But the reality of the pitch process was entirely different. He was given $50,000 to produce this pilot.
Which, just for context, in the animation world, $50,000 is practically nothing.
It's nothing.
It's lunch money for a major studio production.
Exactly. So he was working on this incredibly tight budget and this brutal schedule, and he realized that trying to cast 4 separate actors, get them into a studio, and then try to painstakingly explain this hyper-specific, rapid-fire comedic rhythm he had in his head.
It would have taken months.
It was going to eat up all his time and money. So it was simply easier to just step into the sound booth and do the voices himself. Efficiency born of sheer necessity.
And that necessity really shaped the pacing of the show. I mean, when one person is recording half the dialogue, they control the exact microscopic timing of those comedic beats.
Yeah, they can overlap themselves, pause exactly when they want to.
Right, but that efficiency extended to the rest of the cast as well, which created some wonderfully bizarre starting points for these characters.
Well, like Seth Green.
Yeah. Yes. Perfect example.
So Seth Green was brought in to voice Chris. And he didn't just come up with some generic, goofy teenage voice.
No, he went way darker.
He based the voice on the serial killer Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs.
Which is just so weird to think about.
I know. But specifically, he imagined what Buffalo Bill would sound like if he were standing at a McDonald's drive-thru speaker, just casually ordering a burger.
And that detail, that specific image, perfectly encapsulates the tone of the show.
Right.
It's taking something incredibly dark or dramatic and placing it in the most mundane suburban setting possible.
Yeah, that juxtaposition is everything. And then there's Alex Borstein, the voice of Lois.
Oh, her audition story is great.
So she was doing a stage show in Los Angeles at the time, and she was playing this redheaded mother character with a voice based on one of her actual cousins.
Right.
So she brought that specific voice to the pitch, but she was performing it at a much slower, more theatrical pace, like you would on stage.
Which doesn't work for a 22-minute cartoon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
MacFarlane listened to it and essentially gave her the defining note of the series. He told her she needed to speed it up significantly.
Because if she spoke that slowly...
Every single episode was going to feel like it was 4 hours long.
And it's those little adjustments, the speeding up of the dialogue, the stacking of the jokes, that really set the tempo for an entire era of television.
It really did.
Hmm.
But to genuinely understand the arc we're tracking today, we need to establish a baseline for what Family Guy actually represented when it arrived on the scene in the late 90s.
Yeah, we have to look at the broader context of television history at that time.
Right, because this show was the absolute pioneer of what the sources call the cynicism ceiling.
The cynicism ceiling, yeah, that's a crucial concept here.
Break down the mechanics of that for us. Like, what does that actually mean in practice for you, sitting at home watching TV?
Well, prior to its arrival, animated sitcoms, even the ones considered edgy at the time, like The Simpsons or King of the Hill, they still operated with a certain level of underlying earnestness.
Yeah, they had heart.
Exactly. There was a moral center. The characters genuinely cared about each other, even when they were incredibly dysfunctional. Homer strangles Bart, but at the end of the day, he loves his son.
Right. There's a hug at the end of the episode.
But Family Guy arrived and existed in a state of permanent, impenetrable irony.
Nothing was sincere.
Absolutely nothing. Everything was a target for mockery. And because it eventually became wildly successful, it convinced an entire industry of television executives that adult animation had to be aggressively mean-spirited and socially transgressive just to survive.
It kind of poisoned the well a little bit.
It established a very loud, fast, and highly cynical mold. And in doing so, it pushed more earnest, character-driven, adult animated shows completely out of the mainstream for years. It fundamentally changed the rules of the genre.
So, to understand the tragedy of the show's current state, and believe me, we're going to get into just how bleak the modern seasons are, we first have to understand why people fought so incredibly hard for it to exist in the first place.
Right, we have to rewind to the Golden Age.
The Golden Age. So
Yeah.
we're talking primarily about seasons 1 through 3.
The initial magic.
Yeah. The show officially premiered on January 31st, 1999, directly following Super Bowl 33.
Which, from a network strategy standpoint, that is the most coveted real estate in television, period.
Oh, without a doubt. You are inheriting an audience of millions who are just leaving their televisions on after the game.
And it worked. The premiere pulled in 22 million viewers.
22 million people. That's huge.
Yeah.
22 million people sat down and watched an animated pilot about a guy who commits welfare fraud
Oh.
and dumps the excess money out of a blimp over the Super Bowl.
I mean, it was a massive launch. And what kept people watching those early seasons wasn't just the shock value. If you revisit those episodes now, the writing is surprisingly layered.
It really is. It's smart.
Yeah, it featured genuinely clever, multi-tiered parodies of pop culture rather than just pointing at things and saying, hey, remember this.
Right. They actually deconstructed the trope.
Yeah. But most importantly, it retained a cohesive sitcom structure. Yes, Peter Griffin was an idiot. He was clumsy and reckless. But his idiocy usually stemmed from a misguided place.
Like trying to provide for his family.
For trying to fit in with his neighbors, and crucially, his actions resulted in a tangible lesson learned by the end of the episode. There was an actual narrative resolution that felt satisfying to the viewer.
But despite that massive Super Bowl launch and, the critical praise it was getting, the show ran into a brick wall.
Fox?
Fox. The network honestly sabotaged their own product here.
They really did.
They took this weird, edgy, hyper-fast cartoon and just kept bouncing its time slot around the schedule.
You can never find it.
Exactly. And they didn't just move it. They pitted it against absolute television heavyweights. I mean, during its second season, they put it on Thursday nights directly against Frasier.
Which is just a fascinating demographic mismatch when you look at the landscape of late 90s television.
Yeah, explain that, because the contrast is hilarious.
Well, Frasier is the epitome of highbrow, dialogue-driven comedy. It's about a wealthy, sophisticated psychiatrist in Seattle going to the opera and drinking sherry,
Right.
putting the crass, chaotic, working-class energy of Peter Griffin up against the scrambled eggs of Dr. Fraser Crane. It was a guaranteed way to bleed viewership. The audiences were diametrically opposed.
They weren't fighting for the same viewer at all. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, they eventually moved it to compete directly with Friends.
Which is just a suicide mission.
It's absurd. Nobody was beating Friends in the early 2000s as a cultural monolith. You just didn't mess with Thursday night NBC.
So predictably, the ratings plummeted.
Of course they did. And in 2002, after just 3 seasons, Fox officially canceled Family Guy. They pulled the plug.
They completely kicked it to the curb. And we have to remember the context of 2002 here for you listening. This is the era before streaming platforms could swoop in and save a canceled show.
Oh, yeah. There was no Netflix to save the day.
Cancellation usually meant a show was dead and buried forever. The sets were struck, the animators moved on to other projects, and the property was just relegated to the archives.
I was thinking about this while going through the research, and the best way I can describe Fox throwing away Family Guy at that specific moment. It's like a major record label dropping a scrappy indie band right before their underground album unexpectedly goes quadruple platinum.
That's a perfect analogy.
They possessed this incredibly valuable asset, but they had absolutely no idea how to market it or who the actual audience was.
Because they couldn't see the incubation period that was about to happen on late-night cable.
Which brings us to the miracle resurrection of 2005.
Yes, Cartoon Network had recently launched their late-night adult programming block, Adult Swim.
Right.
And they acquired the syndication rights to Family Guy reruns for basically pennies on the dollar.
Because Fox thought it was worthless.
Exactly. And it created the perfect storm.
It was a match made in heaven. You have this block of programming tailor-made for edgy teenagers, college students, and, insomniacs staying up late.
The exact people who would get the humor.
Yeah. And you feed them this incredibly fast-paced, subversive cartoon that doesn't require them to have watched the previous week's episode to understand the joke.
Adult Swim perfectly targeted the demographic that the show was always meant for. It wasn't the primetime family audience Fox was chasing, it was the late-night counterculture.
And it exploded.
It quickly became the #1 most viewed show on the block. But the real game changer, the mechanism that actually forced the resurrection, wasn't just the late-night TV ratings, it was physical media.
DVDs.
Yes.
You have to put yourself back in the mindset of 2003. You would go to a big box electronics store like a Best Buy and buy these massive cardboard sets of television seasons.
They took up so much shelf space.
They did. And Family Guy was uniquely perfectly suited for this format. You didn't have to wait a week for an episode. You could just binge watch them.
And more importantly, you could pause and rewind the DVD to catch all the rapid-fire visual gags and background jokes that you missed when it aired on television.
Because they threw so much at the screen so fast.
Exactly. And the sales figures were just staggering. In 2003, Family Guy sold 2.2 million DVD box sets.
That is absurd for a canceled show.
It became the best-selling television DVD series of the entire year. And at the time, it was the second highest-grossing television DVD release in the history of the medium.
That is the ultimate takeaway for you listening right now. This wasn't just a win for the creators. It was a historic industry milestone.
Absolutely.
This was the very first time in the history of television that a canceled show was brought back from the dead purely because of fan support and physical media sales.
It proved the audience existed, and they had money to spend.
Yeah, Fox executives looked at those DVD numbers, realized the colossal amount of money they were leaving on the table, and immediately ordered a 4th season. In May 2005, the show returned to Fox, pulling in nearly 12 million viewers for its comeback episode.
It was a triumphant return. Truly.
Yeah.
But here's where the narrative takes a dark turn.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase ends.
Right. The fans brought the show back from the grave, but in its second life, the very comedic DNA that made it so special in the first place began to mutate. We move into what analysts describe as the structural collapse of the show.
Okay, so I want to push back on the structural collapse idea for a second because I feel like we're ignoring the elephant in the room.
Okay, go ahead.
When people talk about Family Guy, the defining characteristic, the thing everyone remembers and quotes with their friends, are the cutaway gags.
The cutaways, yes.
This is worse than the time I was a sneeze guard at a salad bar, and then boom, we cut to the visual of Peter getting sneezed on.
Classic formula.
Right. So I hear the criticism, but honestly, weren't the cutaways the only reason a lot of us watched? I mean, the plot of a standard sitcom is usually pretty boring and predictable anyway. Weren't the writers just trimming the fat and getting straight to the jokes?
Yeah.
Why is that considered a negative thing now?
It's a very fair defense, and to understand why it ultimately damaged the show, we have to look at the underlying mechanics of television writing. What you're describing is the concept of the reactionary script.
Okay, the reactionary script.
Now, in classic foundational storytelling, whether you're watching Shakespeare or early seasons of The Simpsons, there is cause and effect. Scene A leads to scene B because of a choice a character makes.
Right. Homer Simpson decides to buy a monorail, so the town goes bankrupt, so Marge has to step in and save the day.
Exactly. The plot is driven by character action.
Action and consequence.
Precisely. But Family Guy popularized a completely different structure. They would be in scene A having a conversation that technically advances the plot. But instead of a character's choice driving them to scene B,
They just stop the show.
right. Scene A is violently interrupted by a completely unrelated random cutaway gag. We spend 30 seconds watching Peter fight a giant chicken.
Which is funny the first time.
It is. But then, when the gag ends, we skip immediately to scene B, completely bypassing the logical connective tissue that got them there. And eventually, because the writers haven't built a solid narrative foundation, the main conflict of the episode is resolved by a literal deus ex machina.
A deus ex machina, meaning a sudden external force that just magically fixes the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like an asteroid suddenly crashing into the villain's house, saving the hero without the hero actually doing anything.
Exactly. The god from the machine. It resolves the plot without requiring the characters to learn or struggle or grow.
It's a cheat code.
It is. And while that random structure was revolutionary and hilarious at first, the lesson learned by the television industry and eventually by the Family Guy writers themselves was a highly dangerous one.
Which was?
Random equals funny.
Yeah.
When the disconnected cutaway became the industry standard for adult animation, we lost the sitcom part of the animated sitcom. The stories became hollow shells. They were no longer narratives. They were just delivery systems meant to hold up 22 minutes of pop culture references.
Wow. Think about how you probably watch Family Guy today. I mean, you listening to this, you likely aren't sitting down to watch a full 22-minute episode on streaming.
Probably not.
You're probably watching 45-second YouTube shorts or TikToks of just the cutaway gags.
Yeah.
And often with, like, a video of someone playing Subway Surfers or cutting kinetic sand underneath it.
It's a split-screen phenomenon.
Yeah. The show accidentally engineered itself for the TikTok algorithm 15 years before TikTok even existed. It became a sketch show masquerading as a narrative.
Which is a very fragile foundation for comedy because it relies heavily on nostalgia rather than actual joke construction.
How so?
Well, instead of writing a clever setup and a punchline, the writers would just rely on recognition. They would essentially say, hey, remember that obscure actor from a 1980s commercial, and then just show a drawing of that actor?
Right.
Suddenly, the comedy wasn't about wit or subversion. It was simply a test of whether the viewer and the writer shared the exact same cultural references.
If you didn't know the commercial, the joke was just dead air.
Exactly. And this structural decay was famously crystallized in 2006 by another giant of adult animation.
Oh, South Park.
Yes, the legendary Cartoon Wars two-part episode.
I mean, Trey Parker and Matt Stone dedicated 2 entire episodes to absolutely dismantling the writing process of Family Guy.
It was brutal.
It was. They famously depicted the writer's room not as a group of comedians working hard on scripts, but as a tank full of manatees.
The idea balls.
Yeah. These manatees would swim around and pick up random idea balls with words on them, like Gary Coleman, hospital, and lawnmower.
Just completely disconnected nouns.
Right, and they would push these balls down a tube. The machine would then assemble those random words into a completely randomized interchangeable joke.
And the reason that specific critique devastated the reputation of the show was because it gave a tangible name to a feeling the viewing public was already starting to develop.
It put into words what everyone was kind of sensing.
Exactly. It suggested that the show wasn't actually writing jokes anymore. It was merely automating references. For a significant portion of the fan base, that South Park episode broke the illusion completely. It was the exact moment the prestige of the writing officially evaporated.
It's hard to come back from that. But, the decay wasn't just happening in the scripts. It was happening visually, too.
Oh, the animation shift. Yes.
As the writing became more automated and rigid, the animation followed suit. The essays we reviewed refer to this as the establishment of the Quahog mold.
This is a crucial element to understand if you care about animation as an art form.
Tell us about the mold.
When you look at the early seasons, the animation was hand-drawn, fluid, and expressive. Characters moved dynamically, they squashed and stretched.
They looked alive.
But as the show became a massive, highly profitable franchise, the network prioritized extreme efficiency over artistry. They needed to get the product out fast, so they changed the technical mechanism of how the show was animated.
I found this part of the research fascinating because you can see the legacy of this across almost all modern adult animation. Instead of drawing 24 unique frames per second to create fluid movement, they shifted to digital rigging.
Right, they create a digital library of assets.
Right, so they draw Peter Griffin's body once, lock it in place on a digital layer, and then simply swap out the mouth shapes and eye movements to match the dialogue.
It becomes a puppet.
It looks almost like rigid clip art. You have characters standing in a semicircle, usually facing a three-quarter angle toward the camera. They might gesture with one hand, but the rest of their body stays completely frozen.
It's extremely unnatural.
The show stopped utilizing the limitless visual imagination that defines animation, and instead it became a radio play with static talking heads attached to it. It prioritized rapid-fire dialogue delivery over visual comedy.
So we have a hollowed-out narrative structure and rigid automated animation. But what really drives the intense hatred for modern Family Guy, the thing that makes viewers actually angry rather than just bored, is what happened to the characters themselves.
Yeah, the soul of the show.
As the narrative structure collapsed, the characters were stripped of their humanity just to serve the random jokes. And if you don't have human characters with relatable motivations, you leave the audience with absolutely nobody to root for.
Which brings us to a foundational concept in television analysis known as Flanderization.
Flanderization, named after Ned Flanders from The Simpsons.
Right. Explain how that works.
It's the process where a character's single, often minor trait is exaggerated over time until it completely consumes their entire identity. A character who is slightly neurotic becomes cripplingly obsessive. A character who is a bit dim-witted becomes clinically brain-dead.
Or a character who is a devout Christian, like Ned Flanders, becomes an insane religious zealot who can't say a single sentence without referencing the Bible.
Exactly. And nobody in television history has suffered from Flanderization worse than the patriarch himself, Peter Griffin.
Oh, it's so true.
When you track Peter's descent across the seasons, it is genuinely alarming. In the early seasons, as we established, he was a lovable buffoon.
A bit of a Homer Simpson clone, honestly.
True. He was clumsy, he was ignorant, but his heart was generally in the right place. He loved his family. But through the process of Flanderization, his ignorance was weaponized. He devolved from a well-meaning idiot into a reckless, impulsive sociopath.
I want to walk through some specific evidence here, because if you haven't watched the show in a decade, it really sounds like we're exaggerating for dramatic effect.
It really does.
But these are actual broadcast plot points. In the episode Tales of a Third Grade Nothing, Peter literally blows up a children's hospital.
A children's hospital.
Yes.
Right.
He's trying to impress his boss by destroying a rival brewery's billboard, but he plants the explosives in the wrong building. 19 children die.
And it's the aftermath that is so indicative of the show's decay. What are the consequences of mass casualty in Koiha?
There are none. The judge sentences him to 7 days in prison. He is out by the next Sunday episode. And Peter shows absolutely zero remorse. He just casually notes that the billboard ended up burning down too.
It completely breaks the reality of the show's universe.
Totally shatters it. If a character can blow up a hospital and face no emotional or legal stakes, why should the audience care about anything that happens to him?
It creates a vacuum of empathy.
And it gets so much worse. In another episode, he drops a dinosaur skeleton on his neighbor Cleveland's house, which ends up crushing and killing Cleveland's ex-wife Loretta. Peter just shrugs it off.
Just another day.
But the absolute ultimate low, the episode that critics point to as the precise moment they gave up on Peter Griffin forever, is Season 12's Fresh Air.
Ah, yes. Fresh Air. This is a notorious episode within the fandom.
It is genuinely bleak and depressing. So the setup is that Lois's wealthy father, Carter, breaks his leg. The teenage son, Chris, steps up and spends quality time nursing his grandfather back to health.
A nice, wholesome setup.
Right. Carter is so touched by this genuine display of affection that he decides to leave his entire massive fortune to Chris. Now, a normal father, even a sitcom buffoon father, would be proud of his son.
He'd be thrilled.
What does modern Peter do? His very first instinct is how to get my hands on that money. And his solution, his actual narrative solution, is to marry his own teenage son.
And the writers don't just use it as a throwaway, cutaway joke. They commit to the premise.
They fully commit. Peter divorces Lois. He takes Chris to Vermont, where he found some obscure legal loophole, and he proposes to his teenage son just to steal the inheritance.
It's incredibly dark.
And Chris, who is written as being so utterly desperate for his father's love and attention, actually agrees to it. This isn't clever satire. There's no subversive commentary on greed here. It's just an irredeemably evil protagonist manipulating his vulnerable child.
And this cruelty isn't limited to his bizarre schemes. It extends deeply into the fundamental dynamics of the family itself.
The core unit.
Right. If we look objectively at the show's narrative shift regarding domestic and familial abuse, and to be absolutely clear, we are not here to take sides on the morality of edgy humor.
No, we're not telling you what you should or shouldn't find funny.
We are simply tracking the narrative impact this shift had on audience investment. When you look at it through that analytical lens, the tragedies of the characters Meg and Lois become glaring.
It's constant. The abuse of the daughter, Meg, started as a running joke about teenage awkwardness, right? Like, oh, Meg's unpopular.
Yeah.
But it eventually became a persistent, deeply uncomfortable reality.
It went way past bullying.
Way past it. In the episode 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, Peter racks up a $34,000 debt at a local pharmacy. How does he resolve this conflict? He literally trades Meg to the pharmacist's family.
He sells her.
He sells his daughter into indentured servitude to cover a bar tab.
And his treatment of his wife, Lois, follows a similarly grim downward trajectory.
Yeah, tell him about the trunk incident.
Right, so in an attempt to bond with his infant son, Stewie, Peter realizes that Stewie finds it hilarious when Lois gets physically hurt.
Which, okay, baby laughing at slapstick, fine.
But this father-son bonding exercise escalates until Peter and Stewie literally lock Lois in the trunk of a car and push the car into a lake, attempting to drown her.
Jesus.
And the punchline is them sitting at a diner afterward, laughing about it.
Which makes the show's rare attempts at emotional redemption feel incredibly manipulative and unearned. I want to dive deep into one specific episode that perfectly captures this failure.
Seahorse Seashell Party.
The hurricane episode. Yes.
That one hurts to watch.
It really does.
Yeah.
So a massive hurricane hits Quahog, and the entire family is trapped inside the house. The tension boils over, and Meg finally snaps.
She's had enough.
After years of relentless physical and psychological abuse, she stands up to them. She calls out the entire family. She tells Peter he's a waste of a man. She brutally dissects Lois's hypocritical enabling of the abuse.
And for 5 minutes, it is the most satisfying, honest, emotionally resonant moment in the entire history of the show. You are actively cheering for her.
Finally, someone says it.
Right. And from a writing perspective, it presented a massive opportunity, a chance to reset the toxic dynamic, to evolve the characters, and to move the show into a new, healthier era.
But instead of following through on that emotional catharsis, the writers betray the audience.
Yeah, and do it immediately.
They have Meg tragically backtrack. She sits down and realizes that if she doesn't absorb their abuse, the family will turn on each other and destroy themselves.
Which is such a twisted message.
So she apologizes to them. She actively chooses to remain their lightning rod of dysfunction so they can survive as a family unit. It's absolutely devastating.
It cemented the feeling that the writers had zero interest in actual character development, only in maintaining the comfortable, cruel status quo.
This brings us to perhaps the most controversial character assassination of them all. The one that fractured the fan base in a way it never really recovered from.
Oh boy. The fall of Brian Griffin.
Yeah. For years, Brian the Talking Dog was the intellectual, sophisticated, moral center of the show. He was the voice of reason, pointing out the absurdity of the family.
He was the audience surrogate in many ways.
But over time, he devolved into a pretentious, unbearable hypocrite, a failed novelist who uses his pseudo-intellectualism to act superior to everyone else, while constantly failing to live up to his own moral standards.
The Flanderization completely destroyed his original appeal.
There is an episode where he gets into a dispute on Twitter, faces a mild backlash, and he actually compares his struggle to Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr.
It's insufferable.
It is. But nothing made fans angrier, nothing broke the trust more completely than the infamous Season 12 episode Life of Brian.
This was a watershed moment in television history, not for its brilliance, but for its cynical manipulation of the audience.
Walk us through the exact mechanics of what happened here, because it was a wild few weeks on the internet when this aired.
So the setup is that Stewie, the infant genius, destroys his time machine so he can never alter the past again. It's a permanent decision.
Okay, stakes are established.
Shortly after, Stewie and Brian are playing in the street. A car swerves out of control and hits Brian going 50 miles per hour.
And the show doesn't play this for laughs, right?
Not at all. We see the brutal, realistic ragdoll physics of the impact. We get a genuinely somber, heartbreaking scene at the veterinary clinic where the machine flatlines and Brian dies.
The dog dies.
The family cries.
Oh.
It is treated with absolute dramatic seriousness. They hold a funeral. And then, in the very same episode, the family goes to the pet store and replaces him.
Just like that. They adopt Vinny, an Italian dog voiced by Tony Sirico, who famously played Paulie Walnuts on The Sopranos. And the network went out of its way to explicitly frame this as a permanent, universe-altering change. They updated the opening credits to include Vinny instead of Brian.
The PR machine was in full effect.
The writers gave interviews suggesting that Brian was gone for good to shake up the family dynamic.
And the fan reaction was visceral. The internet went completely ballistic.
Oh, I remember.
People were organizing boycotts. There were massive online petitions circulating with hundreds of thousands of signatures demanding they bring him back.
Fans were literally getting memorial tattoos of Brian Griffin on their bodies.
Yeah. And then, what happened?
Just 2 episodes later, Stewie conveniently finds a loophole. He runs into a past version of himself at the mall, steals that version's time machine pad, goes back to the moment of the accident, pushes Brian out of the way, and everything instantly resets.
Vinny is completely erased from the timeline.
It never happened.
It was a magic trick, but an incredibly cheap one. It wasn't a narrative choice driven by a desire to tell a compelling long-form story about grief and loss.
No, not at all.
It was widely perceived as cheap clickbait, a stunt designed purely to boost sagging ratings, generate sensational headlines during sweeps week, and artificially inflate engagement.
With absolutely no intention of dealing with the consequences.
Exactly. And when an audience feels manipulated like that, when you demand they invest real emotion only to pull the rug out from under them for a ratings bump, the trust in the storyteller is irrevocably broken.
So if the characters are completely hollowed out, the narrative structure is a random mess, and the humor relies entirely on mean-spirited shock value. It begs a really important question for the industry.
Right.
Is it even possible to do long-running adult animation differently? Does an animated comedy have to devolve into this kind of cynical chaos to survive for decades?
And the answer is absolutely not.
No. And to prove it, we only have to look at Seth MacFarlane's other flagship show,
American Dad.
American Dad. The contrast between Family Guy and American Dad is essentially a masterclass in television writing.
They look similar on the surface, but their narrative engines operate in completely different ways.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a way to conceptualize this while going through the research, and I think I've got it.
Let's hear it.
American Dad feels like the younger sibling who quietly goes off to med school, works incredibly hard, and builds a successful, complex, stable life.
Okay, yeah.
Meanwhile, the older sibling Family Guy is still living in the basement at 40 years old, pulling cruel pranks and desperately trying to go viral on the internet by shouting at strangers.
It's an excellent analogy because it speaks directly to intention. While Family Guy relies on what we can define as cruel chaos, American Dad operates on a principle of grounded chaos.
Grounded chaos.
Let's look at the patriarchs. Stan Smith, the CIA agent father in American Dad, does incredibly extreme, absurd things. For example, there's an episode where he wipes his wife Francine's memory and locks her in a CIA asylum for 3 days.
Which, I mean, if you just read that on paper, sounds completely insane. It sounds just as sociopathic as Peter Griffin blowing up a hospital.
On paper, yes, but context and motivation are everything in storytelling. Stan didn't do that out of malice.
Why did he do it?
He did it because he forgot their anniversary, he panicked, and his warped, paranoid, CIA-trained mind genuinely believed that a localized memory wipe was the best way to fix his mistake and save his marriage.
He thought he was helping.
His actions, however misguided and absurd, stem from a desperate attempt to protect his family or live up to his rigid, conservative ideals. There is always an underlying intention of love or duty.
Whereas Peter's actions.
Peter Griffin's extreme actions, on the other hand, stem from sheer selfishness, laziness, or just random destructive impulse.
The intention matters. It anchors the absurdity. And we see that contrast incredibly clearly with the wives, too. Let's compare Lois Griffin to Francine Smith. You can make a very strong argument that Francine is one of the most well-written comedic characters on television right now.
She is remarkably layered.
She really is. She had a fully fleshed out backstory that actually informs her decisions. She had a wild, rebellious youth in the 80s. She was adopted by a Chinese-American family. She has distinct, weird passions.
She's her own person.
She actively drives the plots of the episodes with her own desires. If Stan Smith disappeared from the show, you would still be deeply entertained by an episode entirely about Francine going on an adventure.
Exactly. She is an active participant in the narrative universe. Lois, unfortunately, is frequently reduced to a mere prop.
A sounding board for Peter.
Or worse, she is often used simply as a setup for misogynistic jokes, or she is trapped in hypocritical storylines where she repeatedly cheats on Peter, but then immediately lectures him on morality in the next scene.
It's inconsistent.
She rarely drives the plot forward through her own distinct, consistent character motivations.
But the absolute ultimate proof that American Dad just handles its chaos with more skill is the alien living in their attic.
Roger. Roger is a phenomenal character study in how to write an antagonist who is still beloved by the audience. He is a narcissistic, pansexual, alcoholic, alien sociopath.
A menace to society.
He does things that are objectively far worse, far more violent, and far more depraved than anything Peter Griffin has ever done.
Oh, there is literally an episode where Roger buries Francine alive in the desert, just so Stan won't find out he accidentally kissed her.
Right. It's horrific. But why does the audience love Roger and despise modern Peter?
Why?
Because Roger's horrific actions are inextricably tied to the mechanism of his personas.
The costumes.
Roger has hundreds of distinct disguises, like the infamous whispered about criminal Ricky Spanish.
Oh, Ricky's Vance.
Or the corrupt wedding planner Jeannie Gold. And when he puts on one of these costumes, he doesn't just look different. He psychologically becomes that character, complete with a convoluted backstory, specific neuroses, and clear motivations.
He commits to the bit.
Fully.
Yeah.
So when Roger does something horrific, it serves the specific plot of that episode. The chaos is a direct, logical result of the disguise he has adopted. It is character-driven.
Whereas Peter's
violence is just a random, disconnected cutaway that has absolutely nothing to do with the story being told.
Yeah, American Dad takes the absurd and weaves it into the narrative fabric. Family Guy takes the absurd and just throws it at the wall to see what sticks.
Precisely.
So, if the characters on Family Guy are hollowed out, the structure is broken, and the jokes are just recycled references, it brings us to a really depressing realization about the current state of the production.
The leadership vacuum.
Yeah. We have to ask, who is actually steering this ship? Who is in charge of this juggernaut? And the answer is nobody.
To understand how the show became essentially pilotless, we have to look at Seth MacFarlane's own career trajectory.
Right.
Remember the context we established at the beginning. He created this show, pitched it, and got it greenlit when he was just 24 years old. He was voicing half the main cast, writing the scripts, directing, and showrunning a massive network production. Burnout was not just a possibility, it was an absolute inevitability.
He was the ultimate all-or-nothing guy, and eventually, he chose nothing.
Yeah, he has publicly stated on multiple occasions in very candid interviews that he believes the show should have ended around season 7.
Season 7, that was like 2009.
He felt they had told all the stories they had to tell, and the format had run its course.
And his professional actions completely reflect that belief. I mean, MacFarlane has not been a regular day-to-day presence in the Family Guy writers' room in well over a decade.
He checked out.
He diversified his creative portfolio immensely. He directed the massive, globally successful live-action comedy film, Ted.
Which showed he could do traditional narrative comedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He created, wrote, and starred in the sci-fi epic The Orville, which is a total departure in tone. It's earnest, philosophical, and deeply respectful of classic Star Trek.
The complete opposite of the cynicism ceiling.
He even released multiple Grammy-nominated jazz vocal albums, performing with full symphony orchestras. He evolved as an artist, and he left the cartoon behind.
He absolutely outgrew it, and the detachment is so stark now. During the WGA writers' strike in 2023, he fully paused all his involvement with the show in solidarity with the writers.
Yeah, he walked away.
Now, he essentially treats Family Guy like a highly lucrative side hustle. He clocks in to a sound booth, records his voice lines for Peter, Stewie, and Brian without having written the context for them, and he clocks out.
Just reads the paper.
He even explicitly uses his lack of involvement in the writing process to publicly distance himself from the show's most offensive or tone-deaf jokes.
Really?
Yeah, if the internet gets mad about a joke, he can just say, hey, don't look at me, I don't work there anymore, I just read the lines they hand me.
Wow. Which leaves the show functioning as an automated franchise. It's no longer a creative endeavor. It is a corporate brand being managed.
And that lack of a guiding visionary, the absence of someone who actually cares about the integrity of the universe, leads directly to what we are seeing in the most recent seasons, which can only be described as rock bottom.
Rock bottom is exactly what it is. Let's look at the actual data for season 22.
The numbers are incredibly bleak.
They are. The season averaged a dismal 0.17 demographic rating.
Yes.
To put that technical term into perspective for you listening, that means less than 1/5 of 1% of the key 18 to 49-year-old demographic, the demographic advertisers actually pay for, tuned in to watch it live.
That's practically zero.
Fox recognized this collapse, and they actually pulled the show from its iconic Sunday night animation domination block. They banished it to Wednesday nights.
Which is huge. That is the first time the show has been placed in a weekday slot since it was canceled in 2002.
And the creative output perfectly matches the dismal ratings. The storylines feel as though they're being generated by an algorithm that has simply run out of inputs.
Give us an example of a modern plot.
I mean, in season 22, there is an entire episode where the central driving plot is that Peter Griffin magically turns into a literal pumpkin.
A pumpkin.
A pumpkin, that's it. That is the entire premise of 22 minutes of television.
It's just lazy.
And in another recent episode, there is an extended, agonizingly long gag where Meg is giving Peter CPR. The entire joke relies on the lazy, shocking visual implication that the father and daughter are making out. There is no wit, there is no subversion, it is completely devoid of comedic timing. It is just flashing, provocative, gross-out imagery at the screen to see if anyone is still paying attention.
Which makes the recent confirmed announcement of an upcoming Family Guy feature film under the Disney umbrella so utterly perplexing.
A movie? Now.
Yes. And from an analytical standpoint, taking this specific version of the show and putting it on the big screen seems destined to fail miserably.
The essays we looked at call it the Family Guy trap. Walk us through the mechanics of why taking this show and turning it into a movie just won't work.
It comes down to narrative endurance and the fundamental structure of storytelling. Family Guy, especially in its current iteration, relies entirely on the 22-minute reset.
Right. Peter destroys the town, Brian is killed, Stewie alters the timeline of human history.
And by the time the credits roll, everything is magically reset to normal. That works for a short, chaotic sitcom format where the audience doesn't expect continuity.
But a movie is different.
A 90-minute feature film demands an entirely different architectural structure. It demands careful pacing. It demands emotional stakes that the audience actually cares about. And most importantly, it demands consequences.
The characters have to actually go through something.
Characters have to experience an arc. They have to start in one place and end in another.
Yeah, taking Family Guy's rapid-fire random cutaway format and trying to stretch it to 90 minutes is like trying to build a massive skyscraper using only the materials meant for a bouncy castle.
Great visual.
There's no structural steel to hold the narrative up when it gets that big. The current writing staff abandoned character arcs, emotional stakes, and narrative consequences a decade ago.
You can't just stitch 3 random episodes worth of cutaway gags together.
The audience will be exhausted by minute 30.
Precisely. Shows like The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers successfully made the leap to feature films because, at their core, they fundamentally cared about their characters.
They had heart.
They had built enough emotional goodwill with the audience to allow them to tell a longer, more resonant story. Modern Family Guy has actively, aggressively trained its audience not to care about its characters.
So as we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, we are looking at the tragedy of a ghost ship.
A ghost ship?
Yeah. It started as this groundbreaking $50,000 hand-drawn pilot that fought its way back from the grave through sheer, unprecedented fan passion and DVD sales.
It was a triumph of the underdog.
But it lived long enough to become a hollow, automated content farm. It's a ghost ship running purely on the fumes of its own legacy.
MacFarlane said it best himself.
Seth MacFarlane himself summed it up perfectly when asked why it's still on the air. He noted that the show has reached an escape velocity.
What does he mean by that?
It's a machine that prints money. It generates massive amounts of cash, and he essentially uses his extraneous cut of that cash to fund good causes, like the Rainforest Trust.
Oh, wow. So it's just a funding mechanism now.
From a purely financial corporate standpoint, there is simply no reason to pull the plug. It will continue to run until the money finally stops.
It is a fascinating, albeit deeply cynical, reality of the modern entertainment industry. But if we connect this evolution to the bigger picture, it raises an important and somewhat provocative question about us.
The audience.
Yes. If a television show can survive for over 24 seasons completely devoid of its original soul,
If it exists now largely as background noise while people look at their phones,
or as split-screen content on social media with mobile games playing underneath it to hold our fracturing attention spans, what does that actually say about our modern consumption of media?
that's a great question.
Are we no longer watching television to be actively entertained, provoked, or challenged by art? Have we reached a point where we are simply paying to be pacified by familiar voices and flashing colors?
That is a heavy, lingering thought for you to chew on. Are we just mindlessly scrolling past the art to get to the noise?
Something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. I hope this conversation gave you a completely new perspective the next time you see Peter Griffin pop up on your feed. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep looking for the mechanisms behind the stories, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
See you next time.